Who's making the face?
Part 3 of 3. Sorry about the interruption. Had to get that boom boom wee. Anyway.
For the Zalia were like one, and yet that did not make her burden less.
That is high as it goes.
The humans will fight with us. The Confederation will fight with us. What a very strange thing.
This is him.
What are you doing? I'm recording.
And yet it was not lost on her that this routine of cooperation
had
yielded the Confederation a superabundance of strength that forced her to reconsider.
I'm not talking about people and names or any of that.
So she tried her best to incorporate this new knowing into her way of seeing the universe. It was no easy thing, and as she sorted her mind through the many signals of her race,
like I used to bump his fists in the morning at the clock. He clocked out when I clocked in. He worked second shift, right?
Their cooperation is like making many drones.
Yeah, he works second shift.
Yeah.
Minds. Like every one of them.
Because I work third shift, so he would be at the clock clocking out when I was clocking in. But I always clocked in before he could clock out.
Massive fleets moving closer to the outlying neighbor systems. And the memory of the
that looks like one of the offices
hemmed her in, still fresh in her mind. She embraced it with the fervor of a religious convert.
That's a bathroom map.
She made her transmission not long after, sending it directly to the entire council. Zalia will support this measure. If one is struck, Zalia will strike back. When all cease to strike, the Zalia will cease to strike.
That's so much
Pankin Homeworld. That the demons who destroyed their empire and nearly drove them to extinction were now openly proclaiming their willingness to protect the defenseless homeworlds was not lost on the survivors, and the remaining government sought from this an opportunity. Their own council leaders transmitted a crude but simple offer to the Terran Ascendancy. We will raise volunteers to fight in the war, as long as what they are paid can be deducted from our reparations, or we are permitted some small reindustrialization on each world.
Sorry, everyone.
No answer was immediately forthcoming when word reached Earth.
Look at this truck.
But they knew all they had to do was wait.
Well, I fixed it.
Make memories with Picture Guide. Unforgettable travel experiences.
Oh yeah, same map. Why did I think this was the same map?
Is this?
No,
It looks like
it absolutely is not.
Okay. So, what is it?
What's this? Sorry.
Goslian Homeworld.
Click,
When
click,
word
click.
reached the Goslian systems, cheers and pro-Terran sentiment were both soaring higher than the clouds.
Number 50.
The reputation
That's
of the
so
war
bad.
apes and their destructive capability eased many a trembling heart along the border worlds. But nowhere was the relief greater than in the office of High Lord Avon. It may be self-interest, but if it's self-interest or true flockhood, as long as they have their ships on the border, that is all I care about. But the real question is, will the massives take this seriously? They've never fought the war apes. They've never seen Terran violence. They've not seen how far the Terrans will go if pressed. The information is there. If they're smart, they'll avoid a war that takes them against an entire quadrant. But then, they've also never lost a war before. And we lost to them once. The harsh truth kept the Goslian High Lord silent. His advisor on the matters of the massives was being truthful, but that did not make it less painful. It all depends on whether or not they see this as strength or weakness, but I think they will see it as strength, the advisor answered. Massive homeworld. Mountain voice. Ignarius grumbled as he looked at the open transmission from the ones the Goslians had dubbed war apes. So, small, little hairless bird? They think we should fear that? His gravelly voice was echoed by the admirals of his fleet and his advisors. I think they play up these war apes to try to make us afraid. I think these other peoples, all are afraid. They unite out of fear, and fear is weakness. Sir, we should at least consider what they are offering. Perhaps we won't save all our numbers if we accept their offer.
Featherless?
But if the rest of them are true stone, we will lose fewer than if we fight. The council member to speak was on the smaller side, and this immediately had him somewhat denigrated by the massives in the chamber. The rocky fist of the mountain voice stood up. If we win quickly, then we will lose few. Our ships are big, and we have never known defeat. Destroy a few worlds. If we harvest them, then offer peace, the whole will crumble. Sir, the Zalia refrained from fighting the Terran Ascendancy. We beat the Zalian incursions, but that doesn't mean it is easy. We still have time. To starve, Mountain Voice Ignarius of the Massive said with blunt dismissal. When the rest of the fleet has reached the border, attack the Goslian border stations and worlds. War apes, lizards, insects, Ursinian, none of them matter. Massives tower over all. What after all could threaten us? Nothing. Nothing, I think. The heavy stomping feet in the chamber drowned out the few who dared to object, and war carried the day. Humph. War apes. Stupid name. You are new to the galaxy, and we will teach you to be afraid of it. It was a satisfying feeling to the Mountain Voice, and he sat back down to absorb the praise that was hurled his way. A long time ago, our people fought a truly massive war. Well, massive relative to the time. Can you guess what caused it? Maxwell asked the Goslian High Lord. I doubt it, the Goslian replied as the pair walked through the tree garden on the Goslian homeworld. Your race invented a form of long-distance communication through wires. We did also. We called them telephones, and ran them along high poles. One of the greatest wars of our history was sparked by an international argument over rebuilding or paying for those from the previous fight 20 years earlier. It was a little nothing of a spark that launched flames of war that would end in nuclear fire. Great things begin from very small causes in our experience. In ours also, High Lord Avin remarked with a mild cluck-like chuckle. It seems we have that in common. Our race gained its unity after a fight over nesting grounds. The great lords decided that they should just have their children pair off there, and after that it became easier to unite. Still slow, but it was inevitable and everyone knew it. Unity for us finally came when the Pankin did. They killed thousands of our young, but it was killing one that was caught on camera that sparked the flames of their destruction. They taught humanity a valuable lesson, that to be disunited is to be vulnerable, and that there were threats beyond our knowledge that we had to meet. Do you know what that band was there for that day? Noel asked. But he didn't wait for an answer, he answered it himself. They were there for ginger snaps. Apparently their commander developed a taste for them. And there was a little small town in the Midwest that had a warehouse storing a lot of them. The woman was there to visit her husband during lunch and brought their infant to see him. He was crying, as I heard the story, because she'd forgotten the formula, and she forgot the formula, because she slept in and had to rush. She slept in and had to rush, because she stayed up late, listening to her brother unload about his wife's affair. Now here we are. Maybe things would have happened this way eventually anyway, but if the Confederation didn't have human aid, what was the timetable for defeat? About a year, Avin admitted. Suppose our outrage hadn't taken hold then. No human armies equipped with Confederation technology. The Confederation would be gravely weakened. The Pankin Alliance was not exactly kind in victory, I have heard. Humans might have made the leap to space at large eventually. But we would have been alone. It would have been a very hard fight if we were lucky. Likely we would have at most become a xenophobic backwater surrounded by a powerful and brutal enemy. They might have fought the Zalia and won, or lost eventually. Or not. And now with the Massives on the move, I doubt the Pankin would have helped, and whatever was left of the Confederation couldn't have. The broad-shouldered Terran speaker's point became abundantly clear. The Terran Ascendancy, the annihilation of the Pankin Empire, the largest Confederation membership in a century and a half, and now a grand coalition on the way to your borders. All because one woman cheated on her husband and a pirate lord liked ginger snaps. Then sparked a series of events that led us to the present. The universe is absurd, isn't it? He asked with a deep, hearty laugh. I suppose it is. I suppose it is, High Lord Avin replied while the human looked on with fascination at the great high trees. I take it that since you're here, the Terran Ascendancy voted as you wished? They did. We recognize that it is far better to fight far from home than in your own streets. We need only wait to see what the Massives will do. Maxwell replied and laid a hand on a large purple bark tree. Beautiful garden. It reminds me of the forests at home. Other than the wildly colored trees, ours are all mostly gray or brown in the trunk. Thank you. These gardens have been carefully tended for centuries. It's a point of pride that each continent manages them for 7 years. Competition to be one of the ones to work here is fierce. The High Lord preened a bit at the praise. Meeting the former admiral in person was proving to be a unique experience. What do you have on the way already? The High Lord asked. The 49th will be here in a few weeks, comprised 12 battleship class and their escorts. We even took a page out of the Zalia playbook and made a few swarm carriers. A good idea from a rival is still a good idea after all. Maxwell chuckled, but it made Avon's head spin. They're so mad for new things that they rethink their whole doctrine every few years. He kept that thought to himself when Maxwell went on. The Blood Miners will be along shortly. That's kind of a showy group. They're formally referred to as the 42nd, but they named themselves after a group of rebels in a book by the author I mentioned. Escaped slaves that went on a killing rampage after they were set free by the one in that book referred to as the Mother of Terror. They paint their ships red and focus on encircling their prey to bring them down. During the war against the Pankin, they brought down the flagship that way. We'll have several more inbound over the next few weeks beyond that. The Massives could destroy a number of border worlds before then if they struck tomorrow. High Lord Avon looked up at the green sky overhead with a shudder. We will have to hope they don't, but if it helps... Maxwell then handed the High Lord a tablet, and the feathery figure swept through the data on screen. That many? He asked with dismay. I just got word a little while ago. I'm sure that information is on the way to you already. I admit you may lose the border worlds, but by the time they're done there, the whole quadrant will have showed up for the fight. And if it comes down to it, we'll help you rebuild, even if we have to use the bodies of the Massives to make bricks, Maxwell said, and put a hand up on the slender avian leader's shoulder. Any response he could have given was cut off when both of their communicators went off at once. The two traded wide-eyed looks that crossed the boundaries of species, and then as one, they answered their devices. The sound was horrific. Crashing metal and showers of sparks, the gouts of flame were being fought. But even while the Goslian on the other end was screaming out his message into Avon's screen, the viewport beyond made it clear enough what was happening. A massive ship was in full view with its weapon ports glowing. A supermassive asteroid hollowed out and converted into a starship. The thing was pockmarked with the evidence of a futile resistance, as much as it was the little impact craters of countless eons of time. The transmission cut off a moment later. Maxwell's communication, however, continued. The Massives have just penetrated the Goslian border and destroyed the relay stations. Before communications were cut, they managed to transmit energy signatures, sir. This won't be easy. We'll make it a lot harder on them. A lot harder. Relay the vote to the Council. A quadrant-wide declaration of war on the Empire of the Massives. When we're done with them, their language will be spoken only in hell.
Paper shredder. That sucks. Fleas and ticks suck too. CRSED can help with this one. One collar provides the longest lasting protection for 8 continuous months. Stop sucking with CRSED.
Admiral Iganati watched as the Goslian forward offensive became a defensive, and the defensive became a withdrawal. The withdrawal became a rout, and a rout became their last stand. They did as well as they could, but what is metal but weak stone? He watched the last ship begin to list, burning in space as the gas caught. It would burn out soon. Most of the others did too. The Goslians seemed to like their bird-like designs, and whether by artistry or accident, they intuitively designed their craft like a bird, with the bridge at the head instead of buried deep within. Their ships soared compared to the way the Massives seemed to tumble forward, the interior gyroscopically balanced within the thick asteroid rotation. It created a naturally cycling armor and made their ships' weapons and systems very hard to pierce. They have other fleets, Admiral. This was only the forefront of their defense. The first officer replied as the first Goslian planet came into view. The Admiral ignored that. Population, he asked. It's only a colony world, not even 50 years old. 20 million mainly concentrated on a single continent and 6 cities, the first officer answered. Remove them, the Admiral ordered. The Admiral did not watch the button being pushed. Instead, he zoomed in on the view screen as broken hulks of the forward fleet tilted off and crashed against the asteroid-turned ship. His view of the Goslian cities showed a disgusting mess of greenery, trees, and other hideous things, and after a mere few seconds, the fire of their weapons began to cleanse the Goslian cities. The avian race ran, of course, or tried to, but the devastation of the withering fire reduced the cities to ash. What about the outlying communities, towns, villages? The first officer asked. Leave them. They won't pose a threat when our infantry finally hit ground. They can clean up, move on to the next world. He gave the order, and his fleet obeyed. 6 border worlds were burned of high population density areas in the days that followed, until the smoke of each world was visible from space itself. Nor was his the only fleet. A dozen light years away, Admiral Ignol pushed the button himself, and down below, a furry species of the frozen tundras began to feel flames lick at their bodies, and another 100 million died either quickly or in pain, as the population was neutralized to make way for the invasion. It was a small, independent planet on the Goslian border, one of 2 occupied by a more recently spacefaring species. 800 light-years away, the Massive's largest armada began its move against the border worlds that encircled the outlying Zalian territory, and found the very first surprise. Admiral Igbalam turned his body to look down at his first officer. Is that a Zalian fleet? It can't be? Can it? The comm light came on. Admiral of the Massives, the Zalian Queen warns you to turn back your fleet. Aggression will be responded to with aggression. You will go no further. The transmission cut off without allowing him the courtesy of a response. Sir, the other border species have sent ships. This may not be the easy part. Igbalam thought that over. Briefings did indicate that some semblance of unity existed in this quadrant. Absurd as it sounds, they aren't of the same mountain. Tension hung in the air. His fleet began to curve out at the wings. On screen, the fleshy ships of the Zalia with their shiny carapace like armor. Their undulating designs with their many forefront weapons were complemented by the smaller ships shaped like triangles and bristling with small projectile weapons. Less advanced species, they survived chiefly because the bordered the Massives, the Goslians, and the Zalia, and anyone attacking them would be considered a likely threat toward the others. And now it was so. Open fire! Break the bugs! He gave the order, and their weapon systems powered on. In the Keelan Confederation Hall. The video of the Massives wiping out mass populations, a final transmission of a Goslian ship before the Maker themselves succumbed to whatever killed him in the black void of space, played before the entire quadrant. The motion passes. Uniform war against the Massives until they have surrendered entirely. There will be no peace for one until there is peace for all. Maxwell's image said, and around the quadrant the cheers of approval went up. But nowhere, not on in the office of Galen, not even on the homeworld of the Goslians, was it more celebrated than on Earth. Not, paradoxically, because they loved war, but because the chance to fight it before it came for themselves again was presented. The wail of the mother's despair had become an almost cult-like symbol in the years since the war against the Pankin introduced humanity to the abyss at large. Human culture changed, between our children and the desolation of the abyss, became the slogan that brought human weapon research to the cutting edge as they studied the biology and structure of every species they encountered. How best to kill that one?
That's crazy.
It was the first question to be asked. An investment in ship technology, medicine, and production advanced to new heights. The fleets of humanity left Terran space weeks before the Massives launched their attack. Jump after hyperjump, they and the others advanced on the best possible position for a fight, ready to make a stand, even if they had to concede a few worlds. But along the way, they did something else. Information is the enemy of lies. And if a man shows you who he is, believe him. They were not just Terran expressions.
What the hell
Some
happened?
form of them existed on most worlds with intelligent life. To that end, small drones, barely the size of microchips, were fired toward the worlds that would need to be given up in order to buy time to gather their forces together. These drones did nothing more than record and transmit, and as they did so, they carried the stories of the xenophobic massives out across the quadrant. Goslians, Illusions, Kalanians, and they kept these transmissions going all the way through the destruction and through the landing of the infantry, the massives' cleanup operations. The people could not be saved. Their stories, and they were told, then retold, through video screens around the quadrant, with a message added by the Terran's Grand Presider, translated into every language in the quadrant. They are coming for you too. Will you let them? Weeks became months as the massives and their supply ships and replacements conducted campaigns of destruction. Zalia and neighbor world raids kept the two fleets constantly at odds. But the massives were slowly pushing forward. And it was this situation which presented itself when the Fighting 49th, the 42nd Blood Miners, and the first War Apes combined with the bulk of the Kalanian Confederation fleet and the Goslian High Flock. In an unusual move, Maxwell, despite not being an active admiral, took position on the Terran flagship, the Perry, and assumed command of a unified force. As they embarked, he whispered quietly to himself while they sailed into the void, into the abyss that terrified and entranced poets, adventurers, scholars, and warriors, to which the devout once prayed to, and which the milk of Hera, and which was now a road to war. He spoke to no one but himself, saying, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Worlds are a dime a dozen. That's what makes the massives so foolish. There are planetoids, useless planets, asteroids. Even if what they need to survive is scarce, if they could just see beyond their own disdain and take the slightly harder choice, then they might be fine. Maybe they would lose some popple, but nowhere near what they're going to with their decisions now. So why do this?" Maxwell asked. He was sitting at the table in the flagship's private meeting room, and around him, other chairs were filled with the images of leaders from the other species of the newly christened Grand Confederation. Because they desire the easy worlds, the easy matter, it is obvious, is it not, War Ape? The Zalian Queen replied, her mandibles chittering when she spoke. Because they don't value the species on those worlds. Pushing them aside means nothing to them, the Goslian High Lord said from aboard his own flagship. It was a sobering thought. Exactly, you're both right. They want the worlds and don't care what was on there. Many of my world's worst aspects of history were born of desire and indifference. Hatred, that often came later, but first, they just didn't value the lives of those who were already there. Hate was often used to justify it later. Many of my people still despise the Pankin, to the point where they want the entire race wiped out. Not content with the humiliation, not content with returning them to agricultural stages, not content with debt. They want genocide. You opposed that, didn't you? The Kalanian asked. I did. I broke a threat, nothing more, nothing less. I don't mind telling you now, I violated a few orders and objections from my own crew back then. But I don't regret it. Worlds are cheap, but species that will never appear again, that is another thing entirely. Who cares about worlds? The universe produces them in such quantities and numbers that even the act of destroying one ensures that new ones will be formed from the rubble. Even if we scattered their molecules all over the cosmos, gravity would draw the pieces together around stars, and again there would one day be worlds. But a species? A species never occurs twice. We've seen millions of worlds in our telescopes and satellites, but a look at the fossil record of any world shows countless forms of life that will never be again. Not if we search the whole of the universe. Why bring this up, War Ape? The Zalia Queen asked. Because I have asked the xenobiologists of every single member of the Confederation, searching for something else.
What?
I sought some proof, any proof that we could make a trustworthy long-term peace with the massives. I spared the Pankin. We spared the Pankin. But we knew they could learn to get along with others. They'd done so before and could again. I can find nothing to support this about the massives. I can find no instance of them being willing to live away from their own kind or share space with anyone else. Studies of their biology show them to be excessively territorial to the point where any attempt at sharing space with them has resulted in extermination.
Alright.
I pored over histories of the early Confederation and found that they were known to have wiped out other species of intelligent life before. Their xenophobia seems only to be limited by their ability to exterminate other life. Can somebody, anybody, tell me otherwise? There was silence around the table. Anything? Any instance where they have shown mercy or lived cooperatively with others, or at least benignly ignored their neighbors if the neighbors had something they wanted? Is there any option at all to live with them?
Started a lot of fights.
Maxwell asked the question, and there was clear silence and nothing more in response. How have they lasted this long? He asked, almost unable to believe it. They are strong, the Zalia Queen acknowledged. Their ships are hard to pierce and their bodies hard to kill. Even my own warriors must drown them in our ichor sometimes to kill them. You are new, war ape, but they have fought many wars and won each time. The only reason they stop, we have said often, is because they had enough. They are a swarm of stone. Now they have not enough, the swarm of stone moves again. We fight, but we are losing. 2 of our worlds have fallen, and you have not engaged.
So funny.
How much longer?
I don't know why it is.
Days. Their fleet approaches the cloud we are now hiding in. A small number of Goslian ships have rallied around a station protecting a small colony. When the Massives approach, I will unleash our newest weapons. Which brings me to one final question. Is there anyone in this region that opposes returning the Massives to the Stone Age? Maxwell looked around. The Confederation species at the table were numerous.
It's so funny,
yet,
there's so many people around.
There was no one speaking.
That you don't really have.
Then I am now more terrible than Shiva, and the finger of judgment is pointed at the Massives. The link died, and Admiral Maxwell sat and waited. He waited at the table, then he waited in his office, then he waited in his quarters. He waited until he slept, and a bright, fresh-faced youth came to his quarters to alert him. Sir, the Armada is closing. They will be in range within the next 4 hours. The Goslians are scrambling at the outpost. Admiral Maxwell got up. He brushed his teeth. He washed himself. He put on his cleanest uniform and walked to the bridge of the Perry. When he got there, his weapons experts were waiting with big grins on their faces. 2 hours remained. The others are in place? Right down to the music, Admiral. The youngest of the lot said to him, "But what if I could ask, sir, is Ride of the Valkyries? Trust me, you'll love it." The Admiral replied to the young woman asked. She brushed back her short blonde hair and shrugged. "If you say so, sir." She had a pearly white smile that caught the light just right and let him briefly forget just why she was happy. War apes, he thought. Accurate name. Many light years away, the hit-and-run campaigns of the Zalia and the neighbor planets were slowly pushing back the Massives. Not far behind him, other Terran fleets were on the move to go assist those states, and still others were en route and linking arms to provide further assistance to the Zalia.
I am Butch Loxton. I'm a Los Angeles-based artist who creates skull mask and performs at Smoke. I'm inspired by the Day of the Dead culture here in Los Angeles. The biggest benefit of being on Facebook as an artist is instantly being able to reach your audience. Being able to have fans who support you really helps with my motivation and also my mental health. I seem to connect with a lot of fans in Mexico. I have a lot of fans in India and also in Europe. So I would say connecting on Facebook is limitless. You can't be afraid. You have to just put your stuff out there.
on the Massive's flagship. One little starbase and a handful of fighters, then another Goslian system, the first officer said, almost bored. Only 20 small ships. For now, keep watch. There are a lot of places to hide out this way. If they're going to pick a fight, it will be here. The Admiral commanded, and his ships began to close in for the kill. It was beautiful, watching the great gifts of the Life Maker rolling forward through the endless darkness. The many sublight rockets now providing direction would emerge, provide direction or speed, and retract again. Everything was rotational, making it impossible for these types of crafts to be caught off guard. They were the screening force, and well suited to resisting Goslian ship-to-ship weapons. Their tendency to put weapons on the wings and beneath the ships made them a little bit predictable. True to his expectations, out of the great gray-blue gas cloud soared a number of Goslian and Kalanian ships. The Kalanians were sleek, smooth, and made of a green alloy not readily familiar to the Admiral, but their weapons were packed to the tops of the ships. Missiles, rods, plasma shots, lasers, they filled the void of space as the two sides fired back and forth. As I predicted, an ambush! The Admirals eyed with smug confidence as the hundreds of ships began the long route that put them in between the planet and the Massives. "Keep it up," the Admiral said, as the withering fire battered and shook their ships. The rotating exterior of their giant to small asteroid-molded ships made an effective shield in addition to the field forces that blunted most energy-driven damage, thus always presenting a fresh front to their more vulnerable enemies. For several hours, the Confederation front stretched out, and the Massives moved ship for ship and cannon for cannon. More ships than I thought there would be, but fine. The comms light began to blink, an open channel. They can't want to surrender already. He mumbled and nodded to his first officer. What he heard next was the most awful noise to strike him in all his days. On board, the Perry. "Do you think they're enjoying Ride of the Valkyries?" Admiral Maxwell asked as the Terran flagship emerged from the cloud in all its glory. "I don't know, sir, but I like it." "May I do the honors?" the young blonde officer asked, and he inclined his head toward her. "Please be my guest." She pushed the button, and the ports opened, and the drones shot out. Electron spin-guided drones allowed warfighting from far beyond the speed of light's ability to transmit data, and so the development of advanced drone technology meant that an entirely new form of warfighting was possible. Gamers became gods of war. Tens of thousands of drones shot out like rockets while squads of players at home on Earth paid for the privilege while others hired as leaders drilled everybody constantly against simulated massive technology. Using realistic physics and endless lives, for 18 hours per day, gamers gamed and guided drones piloting against known massive tactics. Their little drones were cheap, but packed a punch, and these swarms targeted the weapons, cannons, and thrusters of the massive ships whenever they emerged. Like a video game end boss whose weakness appeared for seconds at a time, the war apes' urge to play became the means by which they killed. Firing hypervelocity microtubules which, laden with explosives, began to create eruptions inside the ships themselves. Behind the Massive came the next round of ships, skeleton crews. They had two key features designed to deal with the immediate foe. The ships were long and cigar-shaped, except for the base which was rounded and held an abundance of propulsion power. The next was a slew of cables, as the Goslians and Kalanians pounded the forward shields, thus weakening the rest until the drones made them irrelevant. These ships fired their cables with carbon fiber drills at the tips that began to dig into the rock. With no real damage, at first except for the transmissions of other massive ships, their presence would have been little noted, until the propulsion began to kick in and their cables snapped taut. It seemed pointless, until more began to latch on, and the most powerful propulsion systems of the Terran Ascendancy and the asteroid ships of the Massives were pulled toward their own. Maxwell tried very hard not to laugh at the expression he imagined on the face of the Massive's admiral as his smaller ships were turned into projectile weapons. cable-bearing ships of the Terrans cut their ties and zipped away as the inexorable crash rocked the ships and the asteroids began to break apart. Next, Maxwell said, and the more traditional battleships began to emerge, the swarms of drones were taking what they would count as casualties. While back on Earth, bets were being placed and new drones bought by players eager to further the fight. The armada of the Massives began to shift to deal with the new threat, and in so doing, they exposed their cannons to the drones, while the traditional battleships contradicted doctrine and aimed not at the nearest ships, but at the most distant. Their weapons, rods that hit the weaker shields and detonated with the force of nuclear weapons. The tide was beginning to turn. Ready the next. Let's target their flagship as soon as I give the signal. Fall for the ruse. Maxwell gave the order and leaned forward toward the view screen, whispering, "Smile for me, you son of a bitch." Atop the Perry, the cannon aimed. Cobalt-cased tip projectiles were not unheard of, but because they were a threat, most ships had anti-missile defenses of some sort, usually chaff or targeted lasers that would strike at electronically guided materials. A handful of the little drones were hit this way, but while the swarm went on and Ride of the Valkyries began to reach its peak on yet another playthrough, the capital ship of the humans fired a very primitive solution. Javelins, cobalt javelins with tungsten steel lines. The sharp tips pierced the stone and the human flagship began to pull back. "Send in the ruse!" Maxwell shouted the order with excitement, and the human Star Marines on various parts of the ship took their positions on the elevators that would carry them up to the platforms from which the drones launched before them. Equipped with state-of-the-art field suites, they could easily survive the icy cold of space. As soon as they reached the top, shouts over the radio of "Go, go, go!" were echoed across to every team. The shouts went up as the Star Marines rushed for the cables, swarming over the hull of the ship and firing the rocket packs off to propel them forward. They grabbed the cables and began to shoot over the distance between the largest of the massive asteroid ships and their own. Maxwell had a little smile on his face when he got the message from the Zalia Queen, knowing the battle was coming. It was inevitable that she would have ensured she got a transmission of it in real time, as surely as the others did. "War Ape? What are those?" she asked. Her mandibles clicked with rapid, jerking motions. Maxwell couldn't hold his grin at that. "We call them ruse, after a kind of animal called a kangaroo. The animal jumps to get around. Our Star Marines are known that way because..." He waved to the view screen where the Terran Star Marines were jumping off the hull, grabbing cables, and after quickly snapping themselves into place, rocketing towards the enemy ship. "You don't think you invented the idea of a swarm, did you, Queen of the Zalia?" he asked. "Wait and see." The Terran Marines zipped across the void and hit the asteroid dead on, and for the edification of his allies, he let them watch over a secure frequency. The Marines hit close to disabled weapons, points of egress, and drew from their sides not firearms, but long single-handed rods, which they proceeded to stab into the rock. "What are those?" High Lord Avon asked. The eggheads call them rotational heat arrays, but they're more commonly referred to as plasma chainsaws, a nifty little tool, perfect for cutting up rocks. "And what is it these creatures are made of mostly again?" No answer came. None was needed. The swarms of Terran Marines quickly widened the gaps around the dead guns and made their way within, tearing open the asteroid. They began to enter, catching the crews entirely off guards. "I don't know what the Massives are expecting, but rocket-powered plasma chainsaw swarms of infantry probably are not on the list," Maxwell said with a hearty laugh. As he laughed, one ship crashed especially hard into another, their surfaces cracked. The hull breached, and even from afar the view screen caught sight of the thousands of massive crew members in both ships being blown out into space, spewed out of the ships like a spray of spit at the face of the universe. The drones were starting to run out of targets. The rate of fire from the massive ships was beginning to slow down. Thanks to the love of gaming, nerds all over my homeworld are going to be funding more drones, more launch craft. This war might be a bigger economic boom for us than the fight against the Pankeen. The Goslians and the Keelan ships began to rally and target disabled massives, but their rate of fire, too, was starting to slow down.
Making memories with Picture Guide. Unforgettable travel experiences.
On board the flagship of the massives. What do you mean, intruders? There can't be any intruders, we're not docked, the Admiral shouted. Reality, however, contradicted him as he heard the death growls of his crew over their communications, and this dreadful, horrible howls like unto the wind of one of the great gorges of his home world. The sound of hissing, popping, and screaming hit his ears. He turned his head toward his first officer. View screen on the deck where that transmission came from. The monitor changed, and on it, he saw something he had never seen before. Waves of helmeted bipedal creatures were running over the area, killing as they went. They carried long rods in their hands with small, spinning purple line that protruded just a little from out of the center. And it did the impossible. It cut through massive bodies like they were barely there. Despite being much taller and stronger and made of silicate, the massives in that area were unarmed, and the bipedal creatures worked in teams of 4 to 6 to surround and strike the crew members. "Security!" the Admiral shouted, and the button was pushed immediately. He felt his body tense. War apes. These are the war apes. No Goslian or Kalanian would do this. Are they insane? He wondered about that, while the internal sealed doors would do to keep his ship from a blowout. Except for where they'd cut their way in through the gun ports, the whole point of a door was for it to be possible to pass through. The war apes took full advantage of that, and worse, massive security was both few in number and equipped to handle brawls. A boarding action of this sort was unthinkable. "Order a retreat! All ships, general retreat!" the Admiral commanded. "And order all compromised ships to self-destruct. We can't let ourselves be taken. We will not let this ship be hauled off like a prize." "Plasma chainsaws are the best thing ever," Mikhail cried out as he cut his way through the door. "I hope they start selling these commercially." "And you ask why they call us war apes?" Francesca asked from beneath her helmet. It was a comradely sort of derision, and he could feel the smile even if he couldn't see it. "Point taken. Now everybody get ready. This is a security station. There's bound to be a bunch of rocks in here." They lined up behind 6 abreast, the light roaring noise of their weapons as they began swinging them in the door patterns they'd been taught to use, creating more and more molten metal drippings as they cut their way within. The sound of the massives getting ready hit his ear as they broke the first gaps through, each side ready to die. "Mohammed, James, Gabriella, 3 count for support squads. Then fuck 'em up," Mikhail shouted, and a kick of 6 heavy boots broke down the secure door and the war apes rushed in. They howled like maniacs. The first wave, 2 humans went down before the gap could be closed. The massives were brave at least. Not just big, but the squads of 6 knew what to do. Each successive rank to enter took position to surround and cut the giant rock people down to pebbles bit by bit. The fight was brief and brutal, and repeated all over the ship, and from those with cameras, transmitted back to the flagship to in turn be broadcast to the entirety of the Allied forces. Zalia homeworld. They have swarms. They have swarms, the Queen muttered to herself. It had been ages since another swarm had faced off against her own, and that had been a rival queen of her own race before the unification. This changed everything. War apes are adaptable, flexible. Their lack of unity, I thought, was weakness, but they make it into strength. I must rethink everything. Pankin homeworld. The new Pankin Council watched the transmission of war ape madness. Nor were they alone. The government was now totally transparent after the debacle of allowing its secrecy before. So the transmission of the war ape infantry invasion of the Massive's flagship was broadcast on view screens on each of their few remaining worlds. Some were fascinated. Some were horrified. Some, however, were enthralled with the kind of culture that could birth a people like the war apes that had once not only humbled and nearly wiped them out, but which was now acting as, impossible as it was to believe, protectors of the quadrant. The very young, who had no living memory of the nightmare that had taken so many, began to view the Terrans very differently than their elders. Aboard the Perry. Most of the Massive's fleet was in disarray. Several had exploded. The great gouts of heat and flame that extinguished itself in the endless night of the void, fading away and taking any surviving crew members with them.
My gun?
Other massive ships began to attempt suicide runs, using their asteroid ships as rams. "Time for something else," Admiral Maxwell said and broadcast word to the Allied fleet. "We're going to pursue. Join us if you can. Remain behind if you can't. Oh, and enjoy the music," he said, and turned to his comms officer with a devilish little smile. "Make sure the Massives know. Everyone, let it be said throughout the whole galaxy that Terrans, war apes, go into battle with music at their backs. Play Beethoven's Ninth in D, the dramatic version." The Terran fleet formed up again, their ships keeping order where the Massives retreated in chaos, some ships dropping back as they were damaged and unable to continue to withdraw. Massive homeworld. The transmission reached the homeworld, with the Terran music still playing. "They fight like demons. Our fleet is in chaos. They have taken most of the flagship and continue to advance. I may have to self-destruct. Send out everything you can muster. They follow after us." The transmission became fuzzy. "Hit the self-destruct. They're breaking through." And the hall of the Massive's great council chamber sat in stunned silence as a trio of maskless flesh faces charged into view, howling out a dreadful noise as they began to cut down the towering men of stone. Little things, really, but they moved in groups to compensate. In silent, burning horror, the council saw their best and brightest cut to pieces under the ever-present war screams, while war ape music accompanied the slaughter. The transmission cut out, just as the war apes raised their plasma chainsaws up and let loose something that was the same across all cultures and races, including the Massives. A shout of victory. "We can't be broken, we are Massives," somebody said in protest. But the black screen dared them to make a better argument than that, and none was offered. The music of the Terrans spread out over 10,000 networks. The music of Terran children singing something entitled A Christmas Canon. The music went on a full loop and began to fade into the background with the appearance of the Grand Presider on the screen. The massive invasion has been stalled. They were stopped before they could penetrate into the interior. And even as I address you all, we are in pursuit with some of their captured ships. As everyone is now aware, another assembled fleet of our allied states is coming together to rush to the aid of the swarm. The Zalia will not fight alone. The flagship Sparta and its sister ship the Athens are leading the strike. He let that statement hang. What lies ahead is a long war, a war that should never have happened. The hostility of the Massives was known to all, and yet they attacked. Why? He didn't leave them wondering long. Because they thought they could win. They saw a disunited quadrant and believed they could win because of it. They thought it would be easy because we all stood only for ourselves. True, we have our confederation, but there are many others not party to it. And could the confederation have won by itself? The ugly question had a nasty answer admissible in trillions of private minds. Unlike past leaders, the Terran chose to speak to every citizen in the Alliance. His words reaching their radios, video monitors, listening devices, and more. Streamed on every channel, public screen, and more, at his back was the empty void through which he sailed. The Massives will lose this war. Our swarms, our allied ships, they prove a greater truth that is as timeless as time. That together we are strong. Apart we invite weakness. United, the galaxy is open to us all. Let no planet in the quadrant stand alone. There is room enough for all in this universe if they are willing to live in peace. But we know that in this universe, not everybody will. Trillions of galaxies are simply not enough for them. A planet began to grow larger on the screen. Therefore, I propose a change to how we as a quadrant do things. We are many, we are different. But if we put forth first and foremost the right of all peaceful races to live peacefully, we can unite as never before. We can enshrine this in a law that all will follow. A three-tier government, a single presider, a Senate composed of 2 representatives of each people, and a representative house which represents the numbers of sentience. To protect the interests of all, the powers of each will be divided. Further, the top legal minds of every race will craft a common set of laws which hold true in space between every world. In doing this, we craft the first stellar hegemony, a united federated system of peoples that will allow us to face the universe together. In the background, the quiet music calmed, and dreadful lyrics began to reach every ear or semblance of ear. The name of the music in a small corner, "Tear Down the Bridges." And for those who will not live in peace, there can be only one end against the might of a united hegemony. The world loomed large, and across the many view screens, the name of the massive world scrolled. He pushed a button with his false hand as he entered orbit and said, "Go on, give them back their ship." For a moment, the quadrant was confounded, until the view showed the asteroid ship looming large and descending toward the planet with its thrusters on, so that it traveled at 1/3 light speed toward the surface. That asteroid is 8 of our miles wide. A 6-mile wide impact at far less speed caused a mass extinction on my world over 65 million years ago. The Massives were kind enough to arm us with a number of these weapons. We're going to give them back until they submit unconditionally, or there are no more of them left to surrender. For the first time in an age, from the Zalia Queen's Nest, to the Pankin Council, to the Terran homeworld, the entire quadrant was silent at once. We will forge unity from our disunity, if you are willing, and settle the whole of the galaxy together, in peace, in brotherhood, in security. And may any gods there are preserve those who stand in our way, because together we will win through. He looked down at his officer. "Take us to the next world. We have more ships to return to the Massives." The transmission cut out, and were there any gods looking down on the living of the many worlds? The roar that followed would have rendered them deaf. Then the words "stellar hegemony" was on every mandible, beak, tongue, and more. The Massives of the homeworld watched the open transmission with alarm. "Send another fleet. How many fleets do you think we have? All of them. Every single ship. We can still beat them. We just have to hit them hard before they reach the core worlds." "Will that really work?" "I think so." Most echoed the agreement that it could, but for some the question could only be asked, what have we done? The Galactic Union was never more than a name, a loose association in which the various interstellar bodies met and talked, more of a social club than anything else. It had no power, it had no authority or agencies. It was nothing more than one single space station that held the 100 or so odd intelligent species from around that part of the galaxy. Permanent diplomatic presence, with the diplomats all living on site, various planets and empires all providing for their own personnel, and supporting it financially and materially by lottery. It did have one thing going for it, however, and that was that it facilitated vast cultural exchanges, and any ambassador who liked something another culture created tended to rapidly popularize it back on their home worlds. In short, a social club and a cultural exchange nexus. A lot of interstellar negotiations took place there on an unofficial basis, but the only thing that had been agreed upon in the last, ever, was that it should be a war crime to target Terran young. Most of the galaxy's species found this bizarre. They formed friendships, yes, but it was those that were intense. The idea of caring so much for quickly replaceable young was staggeringly unusual. Similarly odd was the natural divisiveness of the Terran species, the meme, "Let's start an argument. This is a rock," with a picture of what was obviously a rock, resulted in great confusion around the quadrant, particularly as they saw humans actually arguing over it as if that were done for fun. Equally bizarre was the Terran tendency to unite as quickly as they divided, with horrifying results. The Pankin were now regarded as endangered and had not launched anything into space except for soldiers in service to the fight against the Massives. A dreadful fear of the danger of space was born from their experience against the Keelan Confederation and their war ape allies. Now it was questionable about whether they had a future off their own worlds. It was into this environment that the admiral and revered speaker of the Terran's Grand Armada cast his speech calling for unification. As if they had timed it, the Terran Cultural Exchange Division released the totality of human history, culture, art, and music, from sub-Saharan Africa to suburban Los Angeles, from Milan to Tokyo. A cultural blitzkrieg was unleashed on the Galactic Union, an offering of friendship, a sharing, a gift, and a warning. Unspoken, perhaps even unintended, but it was a warning nonetheless. Do not fuck with war apes. The history of the Terrans was one of conflict. With peace, the gap of time between two wars. Born from surviving two near extinctions, having won the battle for survival on a world with 5 major mass extinctions overall, rising to become an apex predator on a planet that casually obliterated walking and swimming killing machines. The offer of unity peacefully carried with it the unstated fact that war apes had emerged to travel the void between worlds, and it was easy to be at their side and at their back and hard to be in front of them. The common population of most species didn't truly grasp this. For them, the stories, the music, the art, all these things were simply new and unlimited media for consumption. Anything less unified than the Zalia school.
The rest of it we'll do in the last part.